Welcome to Journey Yourself. I'm Chris Sarah. As you know, typically we deal with spiritual topics on the show. We also deal with things that we encounter in our physical life because we are both spiritual and physical beings. And so it's not for us to withdraw into one and ignore the other. It's important for us to integrate spiritual knowledge into how we deal with life. And there's a lot of things that we have to deal with in life. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that we're currently observing as they unfold, and talk about, how we should go about addressing those things. So some of the things that we've observed, we're going to talk about tonight. And I brought a couple of guests who can add their particular perspective and insight into those things and analyze why they are unfolding and to discuss possible actions that we can take to address them. Those topics include the current attack on African American history that we're starting to see in our schools, where the school systems and politicians have been aiming to basically change the nature of history and to eliminate any discussions of slavery, to eliminate the contribution that Black people have made to this country during our time here. So basically, in there, trying to even eliminate or change some of the history books. And if someone's on speakerphone or has open speakers, it's causing feedback. So if somebody could deal with that, that would help our audio. So
I'm on my headset, so I don't think it's me.
Okay.
So I'm going to mute myself unless I'm speaking.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so so that's one topic that we want to discuss, and I brought, and then we're going to talk about some of the other things that are unfolding in different communities where we've seen these accidents of and explosions, some of them involving trains being derailed or explosions at factories and things like that that have created a toxic environment in those areas, and what the possible repercussions of those things are, and whether those are actually accidents or things that are being manipulated to achieve a certain objective. Then we also want to talk about the term woke and how it's been repurposed, redefined, where initially it was a term to indicate a level of consciousness and awareness, particularly amongst Black people, but has been distorted and repurposed to align with the objectives of the LGBTQ community and other objectives that are contrary to some of the things that we are in favor of. And using that term as a Trojan horse for an attack on Black people, just basically racism in disguise. So to discuss these topics, I brought in as guest Brother Estenu Brown. Estenu Brown holds a master's degree in mathematics and is executive director of the California Mathematics Project. He's also a co-author of a recent book entitled Choosing the Sea. And then we also have Brother Arsar Bomani, who is a writer, filmmaker, energetic healer, and founder of the Ask Me Where It Hurts program, which is a program for trauma-informed care. So welcome to the show, brothers. You heard the introduction, Brother Estenu. What are your thoughts on what we see unfolding in the academic environment, particularly within, I think it's actually going down into the elementary schools through high school and probably even into college, where we see basically a rewriting or elimination of history as it pertains to Black people's experience in this country. What are your thoughts and perspectives on that?
Well, thank you, Brother Sarwar, for having me on your program. Just a slight correction. I have a bachelor's degree in math. I have a master's in education. I have a PhD in education. And I've been in, the field of education now. This is my 37th year. And, my studies have taught me that, ever since we've been here, our people have been here in what is known as the United States of America, there's been a battle for our education, right? For us to be educated. We know that during the enslavement period that it was illegal to teach an enslaved person to read or write, yet we did that we learned how to read and write even with the danger that it would cause, right?
Yep.
And then after, emancipation, one of the first things that formerly enslaved African people did was start schools, right? And over the course from our emancipation to the turn of the 20th century, we made huge gains. We closed the elementary education gap. And then within the next couple of decades, we were able to close the high school education gap. And, of course, the history of us starting, the HBCU so that we could, educate ourselves. We know the story of Booker T. Washington, the Tuskegee Institute, and, all of the stories of the HBCUs where, whites didn't want to be educated with us, so we educated ourselves. And whenever we had the opportunity to educate ourselves, we always made sure that we taught ourselves whatever we knew about our history, right? And always taught ourselves in a way that would uplift us. Well, after the passage of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education that supposedly ended school segregation, when African American students first started attending predominantly white institutions, of course, these institutions weren't doing anything to teach us about ourselves. They were focused on, the Western European canon in terms of literature and history. And it was really the struggle of our ancestors in the late 60s on predominantly white college campuses that forced them to teach Black studies and Black history courses, right? And so, I just wanted to put that in that context because it's always been a struggle. And of course, we have to give homage to Dr. Carter G. Woodson for starting Black History Month. Black History Week, which ended up becoming Black History Month. And then, which I think subsequently has led to, where I think many of us got to know one another in the 80s and 90s in Southern California in the and African Study Group movement, where we had this, proliferation of African-centered scholars who are really rewriting world history to put, African people in their rightful place at the dawn of history, at the dawn of civilization, and through, actively agents of world history throughout, right? There's always been a pushback, right? There has always been a pushback against Black people trying to educate themselves. We know that in the 80s, with the real rise of the Afrocentric movement, there was a huge pushback then. We know that Henry Louis Gates really came to prominence attacking the Afrocentric community and attacking our scholars like John Henry Clark and Ivan Van Sertima and things like, and people like that, right? So really what we're seeing is just kind of the latest manifestation of, on the one hand, our struggle to make sure that the institutions that we support with our tax dollars have this responsibility to teach everyone our history, but particularly our children our history. And then, the white system wanting to protect this system of white supremacy and the idea that Black people didn't have civilization and were genetically and intellectually inferior. And so this is just kind of that latest manifestation of that, right? That, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that you took the time to provide the background to put things in context. Indeed, as it was when I went to college, and I went to Cal State Northridge, which was formerly known as San Fernando Valley State. At the time that I had gone there, it was right after the period of time where Black people were taking such actions as taking over the administrative offices at those campuses in order for them to initiate a Pan-African Studies program on those institutions. And that actually happened at Cal State Northridge, where, some athletes, in response to one of the football players being verbally and physically abused, prompted the Black Student Union on the campus to take control of the administrative offices there. And part of their demands was the initiation of Pan-African Studies. And that was something that happened across the country to initiate Black or Pan-African Studies programs.
Absolutely. In fact, what's interesting about that, I ran into a retired Pan-African Studies professor from Northridge, Dr. Rahima Gray. And she was just telling me they just had the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Pan-African Studies Department at Cal State Northridge. And, one of the movies, there was a movie that played at this year's Pan-African Film Festival about City College in New York and how the brothers and sisters, integrated that institution, which was a free public institution, but wasn't admitting Black and brown students, and how they had to, go there and demand that the school let them in. And, once they got there, then they had to demand, Black studies. So, that scenario reproduced itself multiple times across the United States at these predominantly white institutions, no doubt.
Brother Asar, you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
Oh, absolutely, brother, man. As always, man, I appreciate the invitation and the platform that you're providing for us to get our voices and our opinions out there as it applies to our particular skill sets. And I tend to look at everything through a socio-historical and socio-analytical lens as it applies to institutionalized systemic structural racism, because this world is literally governed through that lens. And the more they feel threatened by our presence. And anytime we become self-empowering and self-determining in our own goals as far as Black folks, African Americans, whatever you want to choose to call yourself, or you're more, whatever the case may be, it sends a red flag up for them to try to implement countermeasures, to try to neutralize whatever efforts we're making. So we can go back socio-historically from like 325 AD in the First Council of Nicaea in Europe, where they actually sat down and came up with an edict called the Papal Bull, Doctrine of Discovery, giving the Catholic Church permission to invade and colonize at gunpoint anybody from all of the different continents that's on this planet. So you go from there to the popes in like 1425, when they started to send out their little minions and actually invade the various lands where people of color, always people of color, are already there. So ever since they became in existence as a collective group, we have always been under attack. And what you're seeing currently is just a 21st century manifestation of that fear, because they're hearing a narrative that here in America that in 25, 30 years, they're going to cease to be the majority. And in my opinion, I don't think they've ever been the majority, but that's a conversation for another day. But when they feel their reigns of power being diminished, you get this violent attacks that we're seeing through extrajudicial executions of just law-abiding citizens just for traffic stops. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we can go through the list of Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, the list goes on, and we could spend hours just talking about that particular phenomenon, where we can see that they feel so threatened that they're willing to execute us, assassinate us in plain view of all of the cameras, because everybody has camera phones these days. Yep. So when you look at it from a psychoanalytical perspective, we're looking at an increased fear paradigm from the Eurocentric perspective. They feel like they're backed in the corner because their power is being diminished. So when you start talking about it from an institutionalized, systemic, structural, racist perspective, that's every institution that governs this planet. From religion to education to entertainment to law to politics, all of the institutions that literally dictate who, what, when, and where as it applies to socialization in this country, they are in control of it, and they feel like their reigns of power are being slowly edged away. So what we're seeing is a countermeasure to that. So that's kind of like my position on it. We have to be very mindful that the more fear they feel like they are confronted with, the more violent they're going to become, because they've always won because they're violent. That's the one thing that they've invented better than anybody or any other group on this planet, is they are violent. They're experts at war. So if we don't look at this war of attrition we're being subject to, we are in serious trouble. That's kind of my position.
Right. And, just to kind of, follow up on that, part of warfare, Steve used to always tell us, Steve Coker used to always tell us that 90% of warfare is psychological. Right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that's where this education piece comes in, right? And so, if we talk about this kind of current movement, the anti-critical race theory, the banning of the books, this attack on the College Board African American Studies Advanced Placement course, this is, just a very recent manifestation. So what happened in 2020 after the police lynching murder of George Floyd, all over the country, whether it was multinational corporations, all of these different organizations, educational institutions put out these very glowing statements about solidarity and racial unity. And so what a lot of schools started to do in response was to really begin to start exploring how do they make their curriculum more diverse, inclusive, how do they, just make circumstances better for the students of color. And so school districts got together and put together these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and things were going along fine. But I think this Black Lives Matter movement just got a little bit too strong. And so as any movement for racial justice gets too strong, there's always a backlash. And so the backlash started, one of the things that the right and the white supremacists have that unfortunately we don't have are think tanks where they sit back and come up with what the strategy is going to be to counteract these movements. And so they very craftily decided to focus on this idea of critical race theory. And for a number of reasons. One, they knew most people didn't know what it was, so they could define it, right? And then use that as the weapon to beat, all of these schools over the head with. Now, CRT, the initials, critical race theory, the initials are CRT. Now, critical race theory, as has been repeated multiple times, is a theory that was developed by African-American legal scholars like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it was really coming up with a theory to analyze the racism in the criminal justice system. But of course, the theory applies to every other system, like Brother Assar related to, the education system. And so many educational scholars also picked up critical race theory as a way to analyze what's happening in education. But critical race theory is something that's only taught at the graduate level, right?
Yes.
Now, one of the things that is implemented at the K-12 level is culturally relevant and responsive teaching, which also has the letter CRT, right? And so part of it was the conflation of those two things, because critical race theory is not being taught in K-12, but it doesn't matter. They took it and ran with it, right? And so they've defined critical race theory to be anything that brings up the issues of race and racism. In fact, I came across this bill that was posed in the Wisconsin state legislature, an anti-critical race theory bill. And they have a list of 89 words or terms that they say are a shield for critical race theory. And they're terms like action civics, socio-emotional learning, diversity, equity, and inclusion, abolitionist teaching, anti-racism, anti-blackness. I'm literally reading from this list: critical pedagogy, cultural relevance, decentering whiteness, educational justice, equity, hegemony, instructional bias, institutional oppression, intersection, microaggressions, racial healing, racial justice, social justice, white privilege. Any of these terms, whiteness, woke, right? Any of these terms, they're saying is a proxy for this critical race theory. So in their opinion, the curriculum is rife with this divisive curricula that's teaching white students to hate themselves, that's teaching, students of color to hate white people, and so it needs to be removed. And so they've removed the writings of Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, any African-American scholar that, talks about racism. With this AP African Studies course, the governor of Florida, who was a Cro-Magnon, if I ever saw one, talked about the fact that that African-American studies has no intellectual value, significantly lacks educational value. And what he objected to in the course was any discussion of reparations, Black Lives Matter, prison abolition or police abolition. There's some other issues as well, but those were some of the things that he wanted taken out. And of course, what happened? The College Board capitulated to his request, right? And now they've been trying to pretend like they didn't, right? They actually who's that? Jonathan Capehart, that handkerchief head host on MSNBC, brought on the Negro who's in charge of putting it together, who's a professor at Georgetown, to say, oh no, we didn't bow to any pressure. It's just a coincidence that everything we took out of it was everything that DeSantis wanted out of it, right? And so then this week they brought on some other Negroes to again apologize. But the New York Times busted them. They found all of these correspondences between the College Board and the Florida Department of Education, and they know that it was after these interactions that all the changes were made to the curriculum, right? So, it's a full-out frontal attack on, our children and on our education system. But what really bothers me is that the teachers in Florida are so cowed and afraid of the governor that they're complying and taking books out of their classes, right? They need to stand up to this Cro-Magnon and tell him, no, we're going to teach our children whatever it is that they need to be taught.
Your thoughts, Brother Sar?
Oh, absolutely, brother, man. I think this is probably the most sophisticated version of a PSYOPs mechanism, psychological operation to really neutralize or to hide their fear, they being the European. So if you look back at the 60s when they had the COINTELPRO, when you look at J. Edgar Hoover and what he came up with as countermeasures to infiltrate, neutralize, and execute some of the more affluent or some of the more prominent members within our communities, it was talking about, hey, we want Black power, we want our freedom, we want to have equal rights. So to this day, those programs are still in effect, but they just have changed their identity a little bit. And one of the new terms that they're using as it applies to Black Lives Matter is Black identity extremists, which is a spinoff from the COINTEL program. And it's all about trying to neutralize us as we become more sophisticated in how we respond to the genocidal efforts they've been imposing on us, again, since they invaded this country. So what I do is I take their own science, and this science being DSM-4 or DSM-5, which in mental health, that's the Bible from which all diagnoses come from. It's a diagnostic and statistical manual for mental health disorders. So if you look at that manual and you look under the definition of what delusional disorders stem from and how it's defined, when you take the European, who says because he has white skin, therefore he is superior, there's no actual medical evidence or biological evidence to substantiate that claim. So technically, using their science, that is really a delusional disorder. So if we're going to look at this as far as how they're coming at us, we have to look at it from a psychoanalytical lens, because everything that Brother Ashley just laid out, that's the educational aspect of it. But they're coming at us at every angle possible, because what it is, they are feeling the pressure of being neutralized as being superior as it applies to their whiteness. Their white fragility is making them far more dangerous than ever. And unfortunately, we have a lot of Black folks who, like the brother said, they've capitulated. They're like, well, I don't want to get into the crosshairs. I don't want to get into the crossfire of this war that's going on, because it's literally a war of attrition. It's an economic war, it's a spiritual war, it's an educational war. It's every aspect that governs and touches our life. There's a war component attached to it. And unfortunately, they are winning the race. So the more you see the different things that they do, because I read an article yesterday that is it a congressman or a senator, someone in Texas, as far as a high-ranking political agent, if you will, that list that Asanu just ran off, he's now claiming that we can't even use the word racism within any form of curriculum or any form of approach. If you use that word, then they're going to say that you can be criminalized for just the usage of the word racism. So these are the extreme events that are taking place because they see us waking up, which is a true sense of the word being woke, because again, they stole from us, which they've always done that. Because technically the word woke came from when African Americans was coming out of that deep stupor, that sleep that we've been in through religion and telling us to turn the other cheek. When they became aware of self, when they became aware of their ethnic and cultural origins, that was considered being woke, waking up from that sleep. So as always, they come up with these countermeasures through the think tanks that Brother Austin just laid out. They sit down and they come up with these plans, these psychological operations to neutralize whatever efforts that we come up with to counter being oppressed, being killed in the streets just like animals, man. So everything that we come up with, you best believe that they're going to try to put a countermeasure in to try to neutralize that.
Right.
So as far as I'm concerned, this whole white supremacist ideology is technically a mental illness. It is a delusional disorder as defined by the DSM-5.
And as you pointed out, that the reaction is an extreme reaction, which is rooted in fear.
Absolutely.
And this is during a time when there's a proliferation of information. Information is becoming revealed. We're learning more about the history of this planet and how throughout the world, the indigenous people of all geographical areas are Black people, or Moors, or whatever term is the most comfortable, but they're Black people. Even in this country, there's a number of people, including Brother Kurimil Ahua, who has done an exceptionally good job of documenting the history of Black people here in North America and South America, and showing and documenting the fact that the indigenous people of both of the Americas are Black people. I had on last year, or maybe I think it was last year, Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The Original Americans Are Africans. Again, documenting the antiquity of Black people in this country, right? So as that type of information begins to reveal itself, it goes counter to what Brother Asar had pointed out about the myth of the supremacy of Europeans, which has created a lot of desperation and fear about the role that they have taken in terms of the suppression of Black people throughout the diaspora, and in particular in this country. And so the extreme reaction has been attacking the education, the books, and we even went through this to some extent back in the 80s when, as Brother Staten pointed out, the counterattack on the advent of Black scholarship back in the 80s, who were bringing forth the basically an Afrocentric Renaissance. And so we're seeing this again, raising up as more information is being revealed about the history of Black people, and also, as people have been rising up against the injustices, as Brother Asar talked about in terms of the police brutality, and the movements that have ensued in response to that, has again, created fear. And, and as it is, when we are ascending on our spiritual path, we will be met with resistance from the lower part of ourselves, who wants to impede our ascension. And in the same way, those forces of humanity, which represent the lower aspects of humanity, are responding in like manner to prevent the ascension of humanity by launching their attack against us. Brother Asar, you did mention something which was a good transition into the discussion about how the term woke has been weaponized against us to galvanize the attacks to prevent the escalation of those type of programs to educate and organize our people, and has also been co-opted to include LGBTQ and other and others into that. What is both of your perspectives on that issue?
Afternoon.
Well, so I think on the one hand, it's just kind of a smoke screen. I mean, one of the things that the governor of Florida talked about was that there was queer theory in this African American studies course. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what that means. But does that mean that we don't, have anything in there? There were members of the civil rights movement who were gay, right? Bayard Rustin, who was one of the major organizers of the March on Washington, was a gay man. Everyone knows that, right? And so, do we not then talk about the March on Washington because he was involved? Or, James Baldwin, was a fierce critic of white supremacy. And, like I say, everybody knows he was gay, right? Do we not talk about him, or do we leave him out? So, again, I think it's just kind of used as a smokescreen to try to hide the fact that they're really against, black people, right? That it's really against, it's just an excuse, another excuse to attack black people, right? Or to not teach our history, right?
Right. Well, the brother mentioned Bayard Rustin. I heard a recording years ago of Dr. Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, and Andy Young actually expressing their concerns when they were going to the South and doing their tour regarding just the various campaigns that they were trying to promote. And they were basically saying that they had to keep an eye on Bayard Rustin because considering his his desire for young white boys, he was really concerned about them getting pulled over and him getting caught up in that whole dilemma. And not only that, because of his behavior, they were concerned that he was trying to switch the whole civil rights movement into an actual gay movement. He was trying to say that civil rights for African Americans was secondary to the whole gay rights movement. So if you look at that through, again, today's psychoanalytical lens, and the DSM volumes 1, 2, and 3, it was removed in volume 4, that whole homosexual identity thing is considered a mental illness. It's called gender dysphoria. And because of their organization skills, the gay population can get together and they can put extreme pressure on different institutions to shape the narrative how they want it to be seen. So when they came out with DSM-4, they had that term removed, saying that it was actually, that it wasn't true, that it's not a mental illness, that they're born like that. But any mental health practitioner worth their weight in salt, if you listen to someone who has chosen not to honor their biological agreement, which they came into existence under, you will always see that there's some sort of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse within their childhood. And it accompanies them into adulthood. And that's where the confusion comes in regarding them not choosing to honor their biological agreement. There's always trauma involved in that decision making, because again, allowing them to shape the narrative, they will say, oh, I didn't decide this, I was born like this. That's not true. So again, as Brother Austin pointed out, they're using this as another distraction, and they're trying to attach it to us being self-determined, us being black people in general. They're trying to say, well, this is now a combined effort, that now they're one and the same, so let's just use that to throw confusion into the trick bag so nobody can see who's really behind all of the manipulation. Because again, if you look at all of the things that, hello?
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
No, go
If
ahead.
you look at all of the different things that are going on, all of the you got the LGBTQ movement. Because man, I'm telling you, I'm at home most of the time, and I'm seeing that these people, teachers, educators, who are going to these city council meetings, who are actually complaining about the books that they're introducing at the kindergarten level.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not just an isolated incident. It's not just in one state or city. This thing is pervasive. So we have to wonder, okay, for any movement to get this kind of traction, where's the funding coming from? So that's one aspect of it. So you got the LGBT thing going on. You got the the Black Lives Matter thing going on. You got the economic oppression thing going on. You got all of these clowns who are now being put in positions as legislators within Congress who are known white supremacists. So we have all of these things that we're trying to counter just to survive and live our lives. But again, we can't see who the enemy is because there's so many things that we're distracted by. And this LGBT thing is one of the biggest ones.
Brother Stan, you about to say something?
Well, just that, it's interesting because, when you're talking about who's really running the agenda, of the LGBT community, it is rich, white, right? But it's like the cannon fodder, kind of the foot soldiers, the people who are out there putting their, it seems like those are the like lower income people of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are kind of the front line kind of cannon fodder, and then you have these rich, because it's interesting when I've seen a lot of being in education, you see a lot of this stuff, but I've seen a lot of the history of the LGBT community, and they talk about the fact that like the Stonewall riot, which is like the kind of premier event that kind of kicked off the gay rights movement.
Yeah, in New York.
A lot of those were people of color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're kind of like the front line, just like Crispus Attucks, right? We're kind of like the front line. We're out there. We're going to take all the heat and take all the batons to the head. But then, who ends up really benefiting, right, from it are the white LGBT members who got money and privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting. It's just noticing. Right?
Well, yeah, and that you mentioned that, when we look at the impetus for the Black Lives Matter movement,
Yeah, just about to get into that.
right? And the impetus was primarily as a result of the fact that Black men were being brutalized by the police, right? There were some sisters, but primarily it was Black men who were being extremely brutalized and killed by the police, which ended up jumping off the Black Lives Matter movement, which then ended up getting co-opted and taken over by 3 gay sisters.
Yes.
And if you go back and look at the Black Lives Matter website, there's scantly any mention of Black men. Their whole advocacy was for LGBTQ. And so, that whole thing, that movement ended up getting co-opted and redirected on the backs of our murdered brothers. And and as that information has come out, that ended up being more cannon fodder to be used against the Black Lives Matter movement. Which just basically conflated the whole issue. Go ahead, brother Asar.
Yeah, because you kind of pretty much summed it up with Patrisse Cullors. That whole organizational usurping of the traumas that we were experiencing as black men at the hands of security officers, safety officers, or just law enforcement in general. And when you look at the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, when you look at qualified immunity, they can literally execute us without any concern of consequences, which again is a spinoff from circa 1669, I think it's the date. It was Virginia who passed the first law called the Casual Killing Act. So if a enslaved person died during punitive action for not being a proper slave, there would be no prosecution, no indictment for the person responsible for that enslaved person's death. Okay, so again, what we're seeing is just 21st century versions of the same efforts to them to try to neutralize us in this war of attrition. Okay, and then you have to look at other movements from the 60s. Let's fast forward to the 60s, because another thing that we're experiencing as far as the distractions is this whole feminist movement. And we now know that Gloria Steinem was a CIA, FBI operative.
Absolutely.
She was inserted into the community specifically to cause division between white family values. And the result of that was white women convinced black women, hey, since our white husband and our white men are oppressing us, treating us as second-class citizens, you need to come and join us, because eventually black men are going to do the same thing to you.
Right.
And again, that was a very sophisticated psychological operation, because we now know, people who are in the grassroots and understand that game, we know that white feminism is white supremacy and drag, and black feminism is white supremacy and blackface.
Right.
So again,
and to that point, however, when they ended up trying to extrapolate that into the black community and convince black women that that was an issue that they needed to adopt, as you pointed out, they said that black men would start doing that, which indicated the fact that that was not happening in the black community. Black men in the history of this country have never subjugated black women. Therefore, there was never in the history of the black community in this country any need for black feminism. You know, and as we've dealt with here on this show, that was basically a CIA operation to undermine the black community by creating a wedge between black men and black women.
Absolutely.
And that continues on steroids to this particular day. And I think that there's never been a time in this country when there's been such a chasm between black men and black women.
Yes. Unfortunately, black women have drank the Kool-Aid, particularly because see, we're all, half a century plus. We've been in a struggle for, quarter of a century plus. But these, what do you call them, Generation Z, X, I don't even know what they're calling themselves these days. But these women who are in their 20s and going into their 30s, they're literally anti-wife, anti-mother, anti-black woman, because the black woman definition that they have is they want to be a so-called boss bitch. Okay? They want to be able to control the narrative. They want to be able to say that even though I bring very little to the table, I should be able to demand the type of man that I want. He needs to be a certain height. He needs to make a certain amount of money. And even though I can't meet him on this economic level, I still get to demand that. And again, that's the most recent manifestation of feminism. It's a trick bag. And you would think that by now we would understand the pimp game that we've been subjected to. But as Astanu pointed out earlier, we don't have the necessary think tanks in place that when these psychological operations are imposed or inserted into our community, we don't have the think tanks to get together some of the brightest minds that we all know to get together and say, well, how can we neutralize these efforts? Again, trying to limit our self-determination and our self-empowerment. We don't have the agency. We just don't have what it takes to be able to counter these attacks that we have been under since the inception of this country, since we were enslaved, since they actually came out of the Caucasus Mountains. So we and other people of color have been under attack since the European crawled out of the caves and hills of Northern Europe, okay? So we have to figure out a way to, and this show is a good start, There's so many social media platforms out there we can get traction. We need to start coming up with our think tanks, coming up with ways that we can say, well, okay, we see this is what's going on. So how can we, as the silver foxes and gray beards of our community, the elder statesmen, how can we step in and do our point to be saviors, if you will? Because we are in trouble. I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but what we're being subject to, all of the distractions, and we haven't even gotten into poverty and how Black people are just trying to just survive, just hand to mouth. We're in LA, okay? Skid Row, the homeless capital of the nation. 70% of all of the participants, homeless people, are Black folks. And if you've ever been to Skid Row, you talk about the Night of the Living Dead. You got people who are literally stepped off the pedestal of humanity. They no longer know how to exist within a normal social setting. So we got the whole LGBT movement, we got the poverty movement, we got the feminist movement, we got all these different things that we can't even just sit down and catch our breath. So again, we're under attack through the educational system, we're under attack through the political system. Every aspect that touches our lives, that's supposed to show us how to navigate society, it's literally antithetical to our melanin, to our Blackness. And we have to figure out something to do that, because to meet that head on. Because if not, we're not going to make it.
Indeed. And you want to add, Brother Stamen?
Yeah, we're in terms of like the relationship issue in our community, we're at a serious crisis level. I remember before Dr. John Henry Clark died, he said that we're not handling the reproduction of our next generation scientifically. Yes. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing also gave us some rules, and when she put it out there, we all laughed, right? He said we need to stop having children till we're 30, okay? We need to stop playing around with the most precious, a gift that we're given in our community, right, is the children that we bring into this world, right? And that it takes a mature, financially stable, financially stable adults to raise children, right? To raise productive children, the type of children that we need, right? And so that's why this relationship thing is just so critical. I mean, yes. Being in the education system, similar to Brother Asar being in the social welfare system, I see the damage, right? Just the collateral damage of our irresponsibility with respect to reproducing our next generation, right? It is serious collateral damage that it is going to be difficult to recover from, right?
Yes.
And so that's why I really believe in those parameters that Dr. Welsing put in place. We have got to get scientific with this, right? And I'm not saying nobody's saying no sex, right? There's so many ways that you can engage in sex without having children, right? But you need to stop having children until you are emotionally, economically, and psychologically mature enough to raise that child for 20 plus years to responsible adulthood, right? And then we've got to take back control over the education of our children, right? Even and I'm not saying take them out of, even if you're sending them to a private or a public school, we still got that's one school. Every other Jewish community, Asian community, Indian, every other community, that they know that 6 hours a day in this American school is doing what it's supposed to do, but we got a whole nother school that's going to teach you our culture, our history, our language. Indeed, right? Yes. We got to take back control of the education of our community.
Indeed. It's just reflecting upon raising my son and being in charge of his education, fortunately, even though I wasn't with his mom, I was in charge of his education, and I knew he had to do what he needed to do in order to matriculate through that system. But whenever I had the opportunity, whenever, he was out of school, I, basically reprogrammed, and let him know that that was just something that he was being required to regurgitate in order to get a good grade, but that was not the truth.
Yes. Well, again, I don't, I don't want to sound like Chicken Little, like the sky is falling, but we're at a critical stage regarding just our emotional survival, our economic survival, our spiritual survival. Brother Austin sent me an image. I don't know if it was from one of the more popular magazines, and it had Rihanna on the cover.
Yeah, I saw that.
When the brother sent it to me, I immediately just psychoanalytically was like, okay, this is troublesome. And it had her. They were on a beach. She's walking in the lead. Her boyfriend, husband, I'm not sure what their status is. He's holding the child, but he's being led by her.
By her, right.
Which is
And that's,
similar. Go ahead, bro.
well, the sad part is that, and it has created a lot of discussion on social media. And the sad part is that while we can see the subliminal message in that, unfortunately, our sisters cannot and won't and don't want to.
Absolutely. Now, the second part of what I was going to say is that imagery, because they have set directors who actually conceptualize these. And because these people are under contract and their money is being threatened if they don't comply with whatever the set director, we know the status of those set directors. We're not going to get into that right now. But if you look at the cover, I'm not sure if it's still the same. This was a couple of years ago. If you look at the lead landing page of the Black Lives Matter site, the imagery is identical, except the man isn't in the picture. You see a bunch of women, people, coming over a hilltop. And the children, it's one child in the background being led by a woman. So I think there's one male actually in the whole imagery of their website. So again, it's about, well, let's neutralize the men because women deserve their place in society, again, through the feminist movement. Now, if you look at the narrative that our young sisters are swallowing, the new term that I'm hearing, I've learned 2 new terms this month. The first term is body counts. That basically means that these women in their younger years, when they're actually at their prime and most desirable, they don't mind accumulating 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 men that they've slept with within a 5 or 10 year period. And they're okay with being a side chick, which is how they collect these body counts, because the men that they're sleeping with are what they call high profile men. Okay? And I forget the rapper's name because I don't follow that genre of music, but this brother's got 11 kids by 11 different women. And the women, the photo that you see, the women are sitting by his side and they're all smiling. They're proud to be a side chick. So again, the whole narrative about what motherhood is supposed to represent has been denatured. It has been corrupted because, again, the young women of today, they don't see themselves cooking a meal in the kitchen. They don't see themselves being the first narrative that the child hears through the mother tongue, which is what develops the first 8 to 10 years of that child's emotional development, is the mother tongue. These young women, when they open their mouths, it's just mindless babble that comes spilling out. They're ill-equipped for motherhood, but yet they don't mind being financed by these so-called high-profile individuals because they're more into the designer names, the Gucci bags, the shoes, all of the fluff that comes with saying, well, I'm successful because, look, my main man, even though I'm a side chick, he's able to fund my lifestyle. I'm not able to take care of myself, but why should I? I can offer my only redeemable quality, which is my sex, to this man as long as he's willing to buy me all of the latest trinkets. So again, there's so many aspects that our community has devolved into because we have lost the initial narrative in our community, the mother tongue. And because we're so fragmented and compartmentalized, we no longer have the philosophy of it takes a village to raise a child. We don't even have villages anymore. We don't have communities anymore. We have hoods. So there's all of these different variations that keep us fragmented that's literally antithetical to our very well-being.
Indeed. That's what you're saying?
I don't know really what else to add to that. I agree. I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, I'll say this. Again, in order for a kid to be ready for education, that kid first have to be social, emotionally well-rounded. And by the time they get to preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, they are so traumatized by what they're subjected to. And Asino and I were talking a few days ago that one of my patients, or former patients, they're transgenders. And the transgender male, formerly a woman, just had a baby. And the trans female man used to be a man, is now a woman. So they're rearing this child in this toxic environment, okay? And the child has been non-communicative since he was born. He does not possess the ability to speak. So therapeutically, I cannot address that because that wasn't my role. I can't tell them that this child is being damaged by this environment he's been raised in. But that's just one aspect because, spending 30 plus years in mental health clinics, the trauma that our children are experiencing, by the time they get to adulthood, they are literally ill-equipped to socially interact in a healthy way. They don't possess the tools. Mm-hmm. So when you look at, well, how are they doing in school? Are they even prepared to get to college? When Asino gets them, they're already so traumatized that they're not even able to do a lesson plan. What's that
right,
term?
So part of this discussion that we were having is, like whenever I go to a meeting, if I do a work-related Zoom call, go to a conference, I have to identify what my pronouns are, right?
Yes.
He, his, he, him, his, right?
Right.
That's mandatory now. If you don't do it, you will get called out, right? You will get called out. And there are all of these things that I need to be very sensitive to in the work environment because, I could be accused of, harassment or discrimination for not adhering to, all of these different kind of guidelines in terms of the ways that people want to be addressed. And so that just kind of adds this kind of extra layer because my friends are telling me, and Gabrielle, my spouse is a teacher, right? And they have to address the student by the pronoun that they want to be addressed by, or they could get in trouble, right? So, so you got teachers more worried about those kinds of things and then add on top of that. Now we're in California, so we're not dealing with all the madness with the ethnic studies. But add on top of that, then you can't teach books about Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King or Roberto Clemente or all that. So you are balancing all these different things, right? That then you're at the same time supposed to be teaching a curriculum and making sure, right? And a student, you don't know if the student could be sitting there waiting to bust you. Mr. Afar did some critical race theory today, right? He talked about the pyramid. He talked about Imhotep today. That's critical race theory, right? So, you're dealing with all these different issues, and then it's supposed to still be focused on the well-being of the children and teaching, the curriculum that you're supposed to teach. It's just crazy out there.
And Brad, I don't know how much time we have left for the show, but we at least have to touch on, because you mentioned in your intro, ecological terrorism that's going on right now, man. At final count as of today, man, it was 11 different events, man, from Hawaii all the way over to Philadelphia, state of Pennsylvania. So Detroit, Florida, Ohio, Texas, Oregon, South Carolina, Arizona, Oklahoma, Chicago, Hawaii, and Nebraska have all had in the past week some sort of an event to where there was a oil spill, a train derailment, an explosion of a factory that has, these chemicals that once ignited turns into these toxic plumes. And through the World Economic Forum, they now say that by 2030, that if, say, like you have a Chernobyl type event like they're having in Ohio right now, because they're saying that land will be uninhabitable in the next couple of years. And that being the case, through it's a modified version of eminent domain, where they can come in and just confiscate the land and forcibly move the people out through this edict. And they're going to move them into what they're now calling 15-minute cities, to where these cities are self-contained, and you have to literally give up every piece of data regarding your identity. So it will be regulated. You can only travel so far. You can only eat certain amounts of food, because if you exceed your carbon footprint, they can literally deny you the ability to purchase things, to be able to travel in certain places. So this is what we're going to be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years. Because again, they had this in Detroit, this massive plant that went up in flames. And my nephew, who lives in Ohio, called me yesterday and was telling me that they had another event in Cleveland, to where there were 15 casualties. There was this explosion of this plant. And he's a first responder. He's a paramedic. So he was boots on the ground looking at this catastrophe unfold, which is in northeast Ohio, and Palestine is in southeast Ohio. So literally the state of Ohio is under attack with these ecological events, man, that is going to deem the property uninhabitable. So again, that's just another thing that we have to deal with. Yes, we have our own community issues, and man, it just, to be honest, I don't know which way to turn, man, because there's so much stuff going on every day. It's even hard to keep track of it.
Yeah, that's something we're going to have to look out for. I'll just read something into the record that I just pulled up. It says, just to echo what Brother Asar said, says they're calling for now the immediate total evacuation of East Palestine, Ohio, due to dioxin fallout now taking place there. The toxic cloud event that's dropping extremely toxic dioxins across a large area of residential housing and farmland was deliberately generated by the open burning of vinyl chloride, creating a combustion of byproducts of dioxins, which are many orders of magnitude more toxic and dangerous than the original substance. The controlled burn actually transformed the harmless chemical into an extremely toxic, deadly chemical that will persist across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York State for centuries.
Absolutely, because if you look at the map, Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania almost have connecting borders.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying that there are 70,000 farms in Ohio that's being affected by that. Not only that, the Ohio River and the other tributaries that flow from that area eventually makes its way to the Mississippi. So they're saying that 11 states is going to be impacted by this one ecological event. That's just the one event.
Mm.
There's been 9 others, all within a week of itself. So again, I think that they're stepping up their game regarding the final component of the de-evolution of America. I mean, it was never really beneficial for the majority of black folks, but we always, like Steve Copley used to say, we're like the super rat. We always find a way to survive. But these coming events just take it, man.
Well, let's make the transition there on that note. Right. So now that we've identified a number of different issues that were faced, and thoroughly depressed.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to just go into that, but I just
no, but
I get it out, bro.
Yeah, I feel you. But yeah, so what can we begin to do to address these issues that we've discussed thus far?
So, something that I said previously, one, we've got to take control of our families and our education, right? And that begins, that's kind of the individual thing that we can all do, right? We take responsibility for ourselves, for our families, for our children, making sure that, they're all squared away. But then we've got to, get back to what worked in the past, right? And we all met back in the 80s during study groups, right? We need to restart these study groups. It's more needed now than ever, right? Given the fact that they're trying to deprive our community of that education. So we've got to start to restart, jumpstart the study group movement and really begin to utilize the technology to allow it to cross borders that we weren't able to cross back in the 80s, but now with the internet, anybody could join our study group, right? So, the going back to the old school principle of each one, teach one, but now technology allows us to amplify. Each one can teach 10, 100, 1,000, right? 10,000. So that's where I say we have to go.
Mm. Yeah, and that's actually bringing in the technological component to it. We know how effective the study groups were, even as limited as we were in reach at that time. The technology presents a very powerful opportunity for us to be able to expand our reach and have a much more broad impact than we were able to have back in the 80s. So that's
and Brother Sarwar, we utilized the technology that was available to us to the greatest extent. Which was AM and FM radio, the cable news stations, right? So we had like Brother Quasi and other brothers who had the cable shows where they were able to take the videos and show them in those on those cable channels and on the public access channels on the cable station. So we were utilizing the technology that we had available to ourselves at the time, but now it's just so much more. It's worldwide. It's global. So, yeah.
Indeed. So that's an excellent point, that we can just basically replicate what we did then on a much wider scale because of the reach that we have access to now, with the internet. Your thoughts, Brother Asar?
Well, I mean, we were trying to get a jump start on that last year when we created the collective of the incubator regarding everybody bringing their own individual science to a platform to where we can actually have an online library to where if someone was interested in like advanced academia and mathematics, they go to Brother Asanu. If it was mental health or anything in the psychology department, they can come to me. And we had our own individualized specialities that would allow kids, when their interest, because like the old saying goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So I'm still thinking that that's a good way to get a start on it. But unfortunately, the thing that limited the actual putting that into fruition was the economic ceiling that we always run into. So unless we can get the necessary funding going to where we can actually promote that as the way we originally perceived it, I'm not sure what else we can do other than that, because it's a novel idea to say we can do this, that, and the other, but ultimately it's going to, finances to be able to put these things into play, because resources are needed to get it to the next level. And my other concern would be is, the encounter trend with students and young adults, they're just defiant. It isn't anything that's, I guess you could say, just mainstream or popularized. Like, to me, they're anti-science, they're anti-culture. They just, they want the bling bling mentality. And again, I'm speaking from a limited scope, because the population I deal with is basically the mentally ill. So that's a very small lens to be viewing it through. But I don't know, maybe from an educational perspective, so you can give us a better perspective, because I just don't see that generation being interested in just advanced knowledge, cultural knowledge, things of that sort. So by all means, man, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I think you have to present it to them in a way that is culturally congruent with who they are and that connects to their lives in a real way. Yeah, they are very turned off to American schooling. I'm sure all of us were. I was. I'm sure most of us were, because it's an indoctrination. It's not an education, right?
Right.
Once students are really taught where they fit in the history and the curriculum, how it's beneficial to them, what contributions they made to it, that changes their whole perspective, right?
Yeah.
And you connect it to their culture, right? And so that is what it, because once students find their passion and what they're interested in, you can't stop them from doing it, right?
Yeah.
Right? Part of it, a huge part of it is that they just have not been exposed, the lack of exposure, the lack of access, the lack of resources. I mean, you take a look at the evolution of the musical genre hip hop. That evolved because all the music programs shut down in the schools.
That's right.
I grew up. I learned how to play the saxophone in school. By the time they came along, all those music programs were shut down, but they still had this innate need to create music. So they took their mamas and daddies' records and started creating music, right? So I really have a lot of faith and hope in our youth and their ability to be creative and really to help solve the problem for us. We just need we need to rescue them from this failing education system that doesn't do anything to inspire or, really educate them, right?
Yeah. You just triggered. I'm sorry. Go ahead, bro.
No, go ahead, brother.
Actually, you and I were talking about this the other day, but Austin just triggered another past memory. Some brothers and I were working at an outpatient clinic, 12 years ago, and we stumbled across this cat who was selling Negro League jerseys. And once we found out that it was a Korean thing, we're like, oh, no, we need to step in and just take this over, which is what we did. So from Negro League jerseys like Satchel Paige to Black Fives basketball, which was a series of black churches on the East Coast that had basketball players who were, they had these co-identities. They were scientists and they were actually athletes, like Dr. Charles Drew. And these churches would sponsor the Negro League basketball because they weren't allowed to play in the ABA or NBA at the time. And we got together and we started getting all the little, sports paraphernalia together. And we would go to these different events all up and down the Western Seaboard, from Frisco all the way down to San Diego. And the apparel was kind of expensive. But our kids, they're drawn to athletic equipment. So we'd have our jerseys hanging in our booth, and the kid would come up and it looks nice because of the colors and whatnot. And I go, well, hey, this is how much this costs. Go get your parents and come on back. And then the parents will come back and like, well, how much is this for? And be like, well, $80. The parents are like, well, that's kind of steep, kind of expensive. So we weren't really selling a whole lot of our product until we switched our narrative, our sales narrative. And particularly with Black Fives. Black Fives had these hanging medallions. It was actually a little plexiglass case with almost like a baseball card in it. They had the history of the church and the different players. So we started selling the jerseys and apparel from a historical perspective and telling them the prominent figures who were not only athletes, but they were scientists in the community. Then the parents bought into that. So our stuff started flying off the shelves when they understood the cultural and historical aspects to what we were selling. We were just selling athletic gear. We were kind of, just things weren't really going that well. But the minute we changed the narrative and brought the parents into, hey, you're not buying an athletic jersey or apparel here, you're buying history. You're buying culture. Man, them folks started digging in their wallets and purses, and like I said, we hit it up big from there. So you're right, man. That's a sense of connectedness. We just have to tap into whatever those adolescent desires are, and just lead them in the right direction. So yeah, bro. Thanks for pointing that out, because I forgot that that's all it takes. Because again, I'm not an educator. I'm a mental health practitioner. So.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense because as it was with all of us and others, we were checked out, particularly as it relates to history, because we knew that it really didn't have any relevance to us. Right? So it wasn't that there was no interest in being educated, but our people intuitively knew that what they were learning was just BS. That it wasn't true. And so, but like back during the time when we met back in the 80s, there was a thirst and hunger for the knowledge, and the African scholars, those books sold very well, and they ended up making their way into the music. So brother Stamey had pointed out how rap ended up evolving from not being able to have access to musical instruments to make music, but then it also became, the rap ended up being a way to be able to educate each other on history. And that ended up becoming a movement. So it was not that our people were not interested in knowing about ourselves. It was just that wasn't being made available to us. And so, I think it's really just a matter of just making the information available, and people will find their way to it. So, yeah, that's it is on us, and and I'm sure that there are a number of people who are like-minded, in order for us to basically identify what it is that needs to be done, and to initiate some action in order to bring it to pass. And so, as I invoked with you, Brother Asar, as what's his name, Captain Picard in Star Trek said, make it so.
So that's what making me laugh, bro. Come on, man.
All right, and we've got our brother Steve Coakley Jr. We may want to make a trek to go visit his Black think tank, take some time, basically, come up with the strategy that's necessary.
Bro, have you already?
Yeah, that'd be nice. It'd be nice. It'd be nice to have a retreat at the Black think tank and
absolutely
contemplate,
indeed,
our next move. That'd be nice.
Bro, have you already talked about on your show the idea that you came up with the other day, the Coakleyite? What did you call it, bro?
The
Chronicles,
the Coakleyite report.
Yeah, bro. You want to kind of go into that a little bit?
Well, yeah, we'll need to talk about that. But yeah, I'm thinking, since that is the genesis of all of us being come together, and all of us in particular, uh, the genesis being Brother Steve Coakley. And I remember when he was here, he did have basically a Coakley report where he
Yes.
would address the salient issues that were going on as it related to the Black community. Um, and so, us being, his progenitors and, Coakleyites, I think it would be most appropriate for us to carry on that legacy by doing the Coakleyite report, to bring forth the, issues that are of relevance to our community. So that's something that we'll have some discussions about, and we talk to Brother Jamal, and identify a time when we can do that.
Because, bro, when you mentioned study groups, because here in Pasadena, we had Perspective Open Awareness, which led us to African Minds United and Principles of Mayat and all of that. But we actually had a monthly newsletter, man, that we were putting out, man. I think we were coming under the nonprofit of American Friends here in Pasadena. But we had a newsletter, man, that we were just cranking out just all kinds of things. Everybody had their little topic of discussion. And, yeah, man. So, again, I don't think it's really a case of just reinventing the wheel. You just take the cogs and reassemble them and put them back into place and let them do what they do as far as turning out that information, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, brothers, I'm going to have to hop off at this point.
Well, I think it's actually we're at the end of this anyway. So,
Okay.
any closing comments, brother Stanley?
Well, I agree that we cannot rely on this system, this white supremacist system, to do the right thing for our children, and specifically in the area of education. We have to take our education into our own hands again, whether it's a full out K-12 school or outside of school programs that are going to support the mental liberation and building of strong agency and identity in our children. Right? That's our responsibility.
Indeed. Closing thoughts with us, sir?
Yeah, just to kind of coattail in on Brother Asanu, we have a universal obligation, man. Our communities, our kids, parents who are struggling, they are all our responsibility. We have to take our individualized science and do the best we can to impact some sort of improvement within the various deficits that we can just so easily see, man. It's just obvious. They're right there in front of us. So again, we have a universal obligation to do what we do, man. And like you said, Commander Picard, make it so, because ain't nothing stopping us but us. I mean, we have the mental capabilities. We're some of the most brilliant minds that ever come out of LA, man. And we just need to put those together and just do what we do best. Like I say, y'all just let me know where I can boot up, suit up, and show up, man, and I'll be there.
All right. And Ashe. So it is.
Ashe. Bro, man, I appreciate you inviting me on your show because I love getting the opportunity to express my views and get my opinions out there. I have to, as you see, if you don't stop me, man, I can go on forever, bro. But it's just something that I do. So I appreciate you, brother, man, and I appreciate your show, brother, man. It's always good to talk to you, Asanu, and Brother Jamal. It's good to reconnect with you, brothers.
All right, man. I appreciate both of you for joining and sharing your insights and perspectives here on Journey into Self. And I'm sure this won't be the last time we do so. So I appreciate you both for coming on.
All right, brother, man.
All right, peace.
All right,
peace.
What's up? Peace. All right, and with that, Tune in next time here on Journey in the Self.